participants?
Well, it's usually about 40, 50 people in that section. Oh, there's one. Megan Senna.
I was about to say count your blessings, but okay.
Don't say it now. We are live. It says we are now streaming live. So Director Deschelle is being smart, sitting in his corner, being quiet.
The more people, the better, from my perspective.
Yeah, me too.
I agree. Is there something we might be doing wrong if we normally have more attendees than we have?
Yeah, can everybody get in?
We haven't been notified by anybody that they're having issues.
Hi there. I don't know.
As attendees as opposed to participants.
This
It's
should
still
be
a little
showing up.
early.
This should be showing up live on the YouTube stream as well, right?
It is. It's out there already.
Okay, so I mean, we can verify through that as well.
Yep, we can see it there as well.
Thank you, Nikki.
That must be somebody coming in by satellite.
I think that was ET phoning home.
We're all sort of in by satellite.
Dr. Busick, good evening.
Williams, good evening.
So I'll announce this, I guess, when we start as well. But so you know, Angie called me about a half hour ago and had to help a friend in an emergent situation get to the hospital, and hopefully will be joining us in a bit. But I will be, unless she shows up in a couple minutes, I'll be starting the meeting off.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
You're welcome.
Director Geisinger, this is Nikki. When you start the meeting, I'm gonna take the screen share off so everybody can see all the participants, okay?
Thank you, Nikki. That's great. Do we have everybody here? No, we're not quite ready, but. Do we know? Except for Angie. Looking close.
I get 13, Lynn.
Well, Angie's one, and I guess we'll see if everybody gets on when we start.
I see 14.
Good.
Is Director Lewis here?
She is.
Aha, that's what I was counting missing. Sorry.
It's okay.
Is anyone else getting snow?
I am here in Ruby Hill.
Lowry. Trying to pretend I
Yep.
don't see it.
None here in Southeast.
Director Rosenthal, did you say no snow for you?
None here by I-25 in Hamden.
We have some here, just now starting to come down. So I wonder if you'll get it in the next however many minutes.
It's been going back and forth all day here at my house, so right now it's not, but it could start in a minute again.
Okay, I think we have everybody here, and it's 5:30. Are we ready to start the recording and kick it off? Yeah. Who's
Started.
the recording set? I guess that's the question. Is that?
Yeah, the recording is started.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yep.
All right. I will now call the Tuesday, March 23rd RTD Special Board Meeting to order. We are convened as of 5:30 p.m. MDT. I would respectfully ask everyone to remain muted unless you are recognized to speak. I'm Lynn Geisinger. I am first vice chair, and I will be running the meeting at least to start until our chair is able to join us. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Please note that under the current circumstances, the official meetings of the RTD Board of Directors are being held remotely in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare. For the immediate future, the official meetings of the Board of Directors will be held via Zoom and will be audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meetings, will be posted as soon as practicable on the board's website. Visit rtd-denver.com. A live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. Directors and members of the staff, for the sake of the record, if you would like to be acknowledged during tonight's proceedings, I'd ask that you to please raise your virtual hand and wait for me to call on you before proceeding to speak. Speaking out of turn will only add confusion to the record and to the proceedings. For any directors or staff participating by phone, remember that you can indicate that you would like to speak by pressing *9. To toggle your mute setting on the phone, press *6. Colleagues, being elected as a member of this body imposes an ethical obligation for each of us to enhance and maintain the public confidence in this agency. As a board of directors, It is our collective duty to our constituents, stakeholders, and staff to conduct our business in an atmosphere of mutual respect, cooperation, civility, trust, and collegiality. These are values we can all agree upon. As such, I encourage each of us to review the operating guidelines adopted by this board and to act in accordance with those principles, which are available on the Board of Directors page on the RTD website. Ms. McManus, can you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Director Bouquet,
Present.
Director Broom,
Present.
Director Busick,
Here.
Director Catlin,
Here.
Director Cook,
Here.
Director Davidson,
Here?
Director Deschelle,
Here?
Director Lewis,
Present.
Director Rivera Malpietti, Director Rosenthal,
Present.
Director Sloan,
Here.
Director Tisdale,
Present.
Director Whitmore,
Present.
Director Williams,
Good evening, I'm here.
and First Vice Chair Geisinger and Chair Pro Tem.
I am here. Thanks.
Thank you. 14 accounted for, 1 absent.
Great. With 14 present and 1 absent, we have a quorum. At RTD, safety is our core value. I'd like to begin this meeting with a short safety briefing. As more and more people become fully vaccinated, it's tempting to return to normal, and it is nice to know that we are close to getting there. We're starting to move there. But the experts still warn against throwing away your face mask. Face masks and physical distancing will need to continue into the foreseeable future, according to an infectious disease specialist with the CDC. Unfortunately, getting vaccinated does not instantly mean we can go back to how life was before. We need some level of herd immunity in order to fully get there, which means 50 to 80% of the population will need to be vaccinated. The CDC does, however, say that fully vaccinated people can now safely gather indoors in small gatherings with other people or are fully vaccinated, no mask required. It's important to note that fully vaccinated people should continue to wear masks and maintain physical distance while in public spaces. The vaccines are definitely a step in the right direction, and we encourage everyone to get vaccinated. They're a reason to celebrate, but we're not out of the woods yet. Before moving on to the recommended action, I am going to take just a moment to remember what happened in our state and in my city yesterday. It's horrible to us as a country when we hear of the continuing mass shootings, but it's particularly horrifying when it happens in our state and our community. I think I can speak for all of us in expressing our deepest condolences and sorrow for those that were murdered and for their families. We honor and remember the King Soopers employees who, like our operators and frontline workers, have stayed the course in providing their services through this pandemic. We honor Eric Talley, the police officer who responded, who was working to protect all of us. And we honor and grieve people like us who were just going to the grocery store. I want to particularly thank RTD staff and our partners at VIA for the role that they played in helping in this situation. My understanding is that staff sent buses to help transport survivors, and RTD transit police officers responded along with so many other police and sheriffs and security forces from around the area to provide assistance to the Boulder Police Department. There was a news story last night, apparently, that showed one of our bus operators leaving flowers at the site. She had worked along that route or passed it on her way to work and was paying her respects. I also like to thank our partners at VIA, which is acting as a mass gathering site for mental health services for those involved. A driver for VIA, Alan Parsons, posted something that I thought resonated with so many of our employees as well. When he said, one of our clients that I've given a ride to work many, many times, Terry, was one of the victims that lost her life. I've known Terry for 7 years, as long as I've been a driver for VIA. I'm really going to miss her always happy attitude and her smiling face. when I would pick her up to take her to work when she is on my schedule for a ride. I don't accept this as normal, and I hope we can work for a future in which this is a rare event. Thank you. We have one recommended action on the agenda this evening. RTD's board's position on HB 21-1186, reflecting the Accountability Committee's legislative recommendations. I'm thinking.
Move approval.
I'm not sure I picked up the right. It's for the board to adopt a resolution in support of House Bill 21-1186. Sorry, concerning relieving the Regional Transportation District of statutory restrictions related to the district's operations. I'm not sure.
Madam
Oh,
Chair,
it is. I think I see it. Yes.
if somebody will second, I'll make a motion to amend.
Okay, I'll finish reading this. As you'll recall, the recommended action regarding the board's consideration of its position on House Bill 1186 was postponed during the March 9th special board meeting out of consideration for the concerns from Amalgamated Transit Union 1001 regarding certain language in the bill. Since that time, our general manager and CEO, Deborah Johnson, has worked with Union President Lance Longenbaum on proposed amendments that, if approved by the legislature, would garner support from ATU 1001 for the bill. The proposed red line version of the resolution of support for House Bill 1186, included in tonight's agenda packet on page 6, reflects those proposed amendments. With these developments in mind, if there's no objection, I will ask for a substituted motion, which would replace the action as originally stated in the agenda packet as follows. For the board to adopt a resolution in support of House Bill 21-1186 titled Concerning Relieving the Regional Transportation District of Statutory Restrictions Related to the District's Operations, with the amendments mutually agreed to and proposed by Deborah A. Johnson, General Manager and CEO, and Lance Longenbaum, President, Amalgamated Transit Union number 1001 on March 12, 2021, regarding retaining the 58% cap on contracted services and updating statutory terms consistent with modern transit terminology regarding platform time. Do we have a motion?
So moved, Shelley Cook.
Second, Whitmore.
Okay, we have a motion from Director Cook and a second from Director Whitmore. Now I'll ask RTD General Manager and CEO Deborah Johnson to present any pertinent information regarding this action.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Deborah Johnson, General Manager and CEO. Nice to be with you all this evening. Before you, as presented, is amended language as it relates to House Bill 21-1186. As specified, recognizing that this item came forward to the board and was postponed on March 9th. Since such time, I have had discussions with the President of the Union, as stated by Madam Chair, and in recognizing that we changed some terminology that is more reflective and inclusive of what happens in daily transit operations. I believe that this better aligns with what we are doing collectively to deliver transit service. And just for everyone's edification as related to vehicle hours, that really was misleading from the perspective in which I first read this legislation, recognizing that vehicle hours could be any type of vehicle, and commonplace language in the transit space is platform hours or platform time, which we utilize in the course of this drafted amendment as specified by the Federal Transit Administration's National Transit Database Glossary. And platform time basically specifies the time during which an operator operates the revenue vehicle inline service or deadheading, including layover periods in the vehicle at a rest point. So it basically specifies operational aspects that were silent as related to the vehicle term. And then additionally, that plays into the 58% cap relative to the type of service delivery and what we are contracting. So with that, Madam Chair, I conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I would ask those directors who wish to speak to raise their virtual hands, and I will call on you in turn. For directors or staff calling into the meeting, if you wish to speak, please press *9. All right, I see Director Rosenthal first.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, General Manager Johnson. So on the change that's being proposed to the bill, the proposed amendment on the 58% to be contracted, what was the rationale that that was discussed with the union as to why that should be retained?
Thank you very much. Through the chair to Director Rosenthal. The cap basically says up to. And when we think about it holistically, when you're using vehicle hours, there was confusion as it relates, is that fixed route service utilizing rubber tires? And so their clarification was added. So there's a better understanding in relationship that we actually mean fixed route service. Whereas vehicles before didn't basically give an inclination as to what that is. I believe from my edification when I read through this, it was just commonplace language that people who have a historical knowledge of could assume. And so relative to the nomenclature, in addition to the language being retained at the 58% cap, which is a ceiling, not a floor, it enables us greater opportunities to keep forward with the service delivery model that we have.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further discussion? Director Deschel.
Director Lewis was next.
Oh, I'm sorry. Where are you?
He said go ahead. Okay. Thank you, Director Lewis, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome.
This is more of a technical question, but the resolution is that we take a position in support of House Bill 2021-1186. Are these red line amendments currently included in that version?
The red line amendments, Melanie may be better to answer that, but the amendments will officially be added when the bill comes up in front of the committee on March 30th at 1:30 is my understanding. Ms. Snyder, do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. That's correct. They have not, to my knowledge, been introduced yet. They're just proposed amendments that both the union and Deborah Johnson are proposing. If you look at package page 6 of the resolution, it does acknowledge that these are proposed amendments. So.
And should these amendments not pass into the legislation, is it still, I'm curious what others' thoughts are on having a position of support if these amendments are not included in the ultimate language.
I guess I will take a stab at that. I think my understanding is that the bill sponsors do intend to introduce these amendments. We don't expect that would be a problem since the union and RTD are agreeing on them. But I suppose if there is a problem, we would potentially have to come back to the board. Does Ms. Johnson or Ms. Snyder, do you have anything?
So, Madam Chair, thank you so much. So recognizing what's before you is support of the bill with the amendments. That would mean we wouldn't support, your action wouldn't signify that there's support of the amendment sans the red line. Does that clarify? So what I'm trying to encapsulate is that your support of this amendment includes the red line. That's what you're voting on. So going forward to the point that you raised, this information has been provided to the drafters. We don't know if there'll be additional amendments or modifications, but this body is basically acting on what me and Mr. Logenbaum have collectively worked towards and is before you this evening. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that's what was being passed. And that's included in the now therefore be it resolved on packet page 7. Because that's as it stands, I believe that's just a blanket statement right now.
Ms. Snyder, do you have anything to add there?
Madam Chair, I think when you read the resolution in totality with the proposed amendments, I think that it's clear that that's the resolution that the board is adopting is in support of the House Bill 1186 with the proposed amendments.
Does that
Thank
answer
you
your
all.
questions?
Nothing further.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you. Nothing further.
great. Thank
Madam
you.
Chair, if I could interrupt Director Lewis, just as a spin-off to that very important question. So is this board going to have flexibility to move quickly enough if we have an additional amendment or two that's added outside of our purview that we can live with or maybe not live with? I would hate to see the whole process stop, to Director DeShell's point. Is there flexibility with our lobbyists in that regard, or how would we proceed if we have a bit of a deviation from what we're approving tonight?
Suggestions, Ms. Snyder?
No, I think the board has flexibility if you felt that you needed to convene, if the board felt that you all wanted to convene a special board meeting to address any specific amendments or the fact that amendments weren't proposed, you could certainly do that. There's an opportunity to do that. That was
Okay.
board's.
The way sausage making goes on down there, as most of us know, that is a possibility. So I would just forewarn that we may need to have a quick check-in vote. And with that, thank you for allowing me to interrupt Director Lewis.
Thank you, Director Whitmore. Director Lewis?
It looks like our general manager might have something.
Oh.
Okay. Okay. So actually a very similar questions to Director DeShell, and so I appreciate him raising them. And then I had a process question that in the event that these things weren't included, what would be our process? So similar to Director Whitmore's question is, what's our process in the event that these things aren't included? And I looked at the language just recently here online, and it's not included. And to your point, you said it won't be until the 30th, but I'm just curious how we would move forward.
I suppose that as General Counsel Snyder said, we could reconvene a meeting. We could, I suppose, add something that says if these amendments, well, I don't know if we want to support the bill without these amendments. So I guess in my thought would be that is the best way to go. General Counsel, do you have, or Ms. Johnson, either of you have anything to add there?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My recommendation is that we stay the course relative to what these amendments are. And if something were to change, as Director Whitmore has pointed out, I believe it would be in our best interest to calendar a special board meeting to give this entire body an opportunity to opine as it relates to our path forward with supporting this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great. I'm not sure if Director Cook or Director Catlin was next, so I'll go alphabetically. Director Catlin.
Good guess. I wanted to first of all thank General Manager and CEO Johnson for the hard work and collaboration with the union president. Well done, and I think that sets the groundwork for further positive relationships. So I wanted to thank you. And then the items that were addressed by Directors DeShell and Whitmore and Lewis, I shared. I was concerned that we support the resolution as it stands, but we all know that amendments can get tacked on at the last minute that may not be something that this board would want to have included in the bill. So I do appreciate the flexibility in being able to reconvene a special board meeting should that occur. But again, I am pleased to see that this provides RTD with more flexibility. And I was also pleased to see that the bill titling was fairly narrowly defined so as not to create an open door for some other activities at the legislature. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think the questions that all of the questions so far have been around the same issue. And since it's not our bill, it's an accountability committee's bill, and Representative Gray and Senator Winter are moving it forward. The bill will continue moving forward, even if it's amended, and there will be time, I think, for us to come back and make a different statement if a different statement is warranted. I see Director Cook, but I also see General Manager Johnson. Did you have something you wanted to add? Oh, your hand's still up? Okay. Director Cook.
Yeah, thank you. Just to double check with General Manager Johnson. So if I understand things, the 58% with the modification in terminology doesn't affect the sort of the real-time ceiling. Is that true? Or have we always used a platform time as sort of our de facto definition for determining whether we were meeting or coming underneath the 58%?
Yes, more or less we have. I mean, from my recollection, and I want to acknowledge Michael Ford and Jesse Carter and also General Counsel Snyder, who assisted me in this endeavor. I don't want anybody to think that it was a one-woman show. But with that as a backdrop, Director Cook, this does enable us, because I'll share, as relates to different options whereby we talk about contracted service and recognizing that there could be non-governmental entities outside, the type of gig work and hailing and things of the like. Utilizing platform time is more specific as it relates to the way in which you deliver bus service, right? And so that's why it was important that we switch from vehicle, because what does vehicle actually mean? In the grand scheme of things, unless you read the entire statute, a rail vehicle is a vehicle, but this is talking about rubber tires. And so going through this whole sort of edification process that I had, recognizing what the intent of the language was, it became apparent to me that clarification was needed relative to the terminology. So if somebody else is sitting in this seat in 7 years and goes back and read this, that platform time in the transportation space is known terminology, whereas a vehicle could be any type of vehicle.
Madam Chair?
Just go ahead.
So just to verify, this doesn't, once put into effect and using that term versus service hours, have the effect of reducing the cap, correct?
No. So when you're saying, yes, when you say service hours, that's, for all intents and purposes, as you read this, platform time deals with revenue service. So there's other service hours that one could have where you're not actually operating in revenue service, if that makes sense. So there's some nuances here. I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but to answer your question, yes, this enables us to deliver our service in the manner in which that it was intended.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other comments or discussion? Okay, I will call for the vote on the matter.
Actually, Madam Chair,
Uh-huh.
a quick question.
Sure.
Have there also been any conversations with the governor's office as to, maybe his thoughts on this bill? As you know, governors in general have different styles as to their involvement in legislation, particular pieces, or legislation in general. I know the governor has been interested in RTD matters. Has there been any discussion with his office as to his opinion on this bill?
I can answer that. I think that I know that the co-chairs of the Accountability Committee did meet with the governor and give him an update and presentation on the Accountability Committee's work and on this bill. I don't know that the governor has expressed I have not heard any response from that, but I think he has been briefed on the provisions of the bill.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Great. At this time, I'd ask, I would call for a roll call vote. I would ask all directors to unmute your microphones and we'll proceed in alphabetical order. Ms. McManus, can you do the roll call vote, please?
Yes, thank you. Director Bouquet,
Yes.
Director Broom,
Yes.
Director Busick,
Yes.
Director Catlin,
Yes.
Director Cook,
Yes.
Director Davidson,
Yes.
Director DeShell,
Yes.
Director Lewis,
Aye.
Director Rosenthal,
Yes.
Director Sloan,
Yes.
Director Tisdale,
Yes.
Director Whitmore,
Yes.
Director Williams.
Yes.
For the record, just checking, Chair Rivera Malpietti. And finally, first Vice Chair and Chair Pro Tem, Director Geisinger.
Yes.
14 yeses, it passes unanimously.
Great. The resolution is adopted as amended unanimously. Thank you very much. Directors, please place your microphones back on mute if you have not already done so. We're on to other matters. There's one item listed on the agenda regarding sub-regional service councils. At this time, I'll ask, well, she says she'll ask First Vice Chair, Director Geisinger, to kick off this conversation. So maybe I'll put on a different hat and kick off this conversation, and then I'll ask CEO Deborah Johnson to join in. I hope that you all received the email today with some overall comments and a few specifics. I want to thank the directors who have given us feedback. I think that we have received, a number of you have talked with some of your local governments and others, and I received some very good feedback and questions from several of you, Director Lewis, Director DeShell, Director Cook, and several others verbally that I've spoken with. A good question was raised, I think, by Director Lewis and Director DeShell about how this board gives feedback in a situation like this. And I think that's something that hopefully we'll be able to look at some more as we get through the strategic planning process, and hopefully look at small committees and things like that, because I think it's a good question. What we tried to do, Director Whitmore and I, was to put together this session to discuss the feedback we would give. The sub-regional council idea is obviously not one that is coming from this board. It's coming from the Accountability Committee. I want to start by just making the overall comments that I sent out today, that the RTD board and staff share the Accountability Committee's commitment to increasing two-way communication with our local and regional partners and our customers. This increased commitment was started recently with regional community and stakeholder feedback sessions conducted by RTD staff, which are intended to be ongoing and continuing. RTD supports the concept of the sub-regional service councils, believing that there are many details that can be worked out with a stakeholder group to be formed by RTD. The RTD board provides the following feedback on the DRCOG Sub-Regional Service Council recommendation. As an overall comment, under the heading of geography, the Accountability Committee recommends RTD establish a work group of regional stakeholders to evaluate two possible service boundary concepts for the councils. The RTD board recommends that this stakeholder group, working with RTD, look at other issues as well, including membership on the council, tasks to be performed, and a plan for outreach and communication with our customers and potential customers. We received input from local coordinating councils, TMAs, board members, our staff, local government staff, and others that would be helpful in filling in the details. So putting this together, I was working with Director Whitmore and CEO Johnson and Chair Rivera Malpietti, and looking at the one-page description of the sub-regional councils that DRCOG drafted and the Accountability Committee has considered in committee. My understanding is that this will go to the full Accountability Committee on April 12th, probably. It's not set in the agenda yet, but that's from my conversation with Doug Rex. So what I tried to do here was to give some suggestions to help guide the discussion. These are not final answers, but it seemed in the questions I received from some of you and the feedback, and in talking with others and attending the meeting, that there are a lot of details that need to be worked out on these sub-regional councils. My understanding is staff likes the concept. I'll let Ms. Johnson speak to that in a few minutes, but it seemed like the stakeholder work group that the recommendation to the accountability committee suggested, which was suggested in terms of deciding the right geography, travel shed or county size, is also a good place to flesh out the details rather than having them all fleshed out by the accountability committee. That's one where RTD can participate and work with our stakeholders. And there are seem to be a lot of opinions out there, but I think that it's a good idea and a good way to move forward with working out the details. With respect to some of the other suggestions I put in this memo and we put in this memo, a couple of these came from Director Cook and also from a number of other people, but just I think the accountability committee assumed that the RTD directors would be integral to these groups, but it seemed like it made sense to make that specific. So we've added that. Also, that these groups would be working jointly with RTD service planning staff to develop the recommendations or plans for transit services in their area. And finally, on resource allocation, the recommendation was that annually RTD would provide a report to each of the local councils, the sub-regional councils, on the value that RTD brings to their area. And in the accountability committee meetings, the discussion, every time it came up, someone would say, you know, the value that is brought to that area is not just a one-to-one, you put this much in, this is what you get out, but there is of course value in a regional transit system. And that was raised by several of you as well, that is, so that just, I'm suggesting that we suggest to the accountability committee that they make that explicit. And just based on their conversations, I don't think that that will be controversial. I can't speak to that, but that's my sense. So Ms. Johnson, if you can speak on this as well, and then we'll open it up for discussion. I'll just say, you know, tonight it would be very helpful to get your feedback if you'd like to, if you generally like this approach, if you'd like to suggest amendments. I think we have time to bring this back if we want to as a recommended action in the Communications and Government Relations Committee meeting on April 6th before they go back by April 4th. It is, again, just feedback. So we could come up with something tonight. We can approach it again in a couple weeks, which may be the better way to do. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to opine on this subject matter. Before I delve in, I do want to qualify some statements. First and foremost, want everyone to know, since I joined this organization and learned about the accountability committee, that I have been attending and participating, and I want to basically share that the accountability committee often has, you know, asked me for input, recognizing my years in the transit industry in the space, and also recognizing that I've come from a transit agency which had something in which we qualified as service councils, and recognizing some of the lessons learned, and recognizing that when you see one transit agency, you see one transit agency. And it's very important that this is reflective and is indigenous of what we're doing here collectively. So moreover, what I'd like to share as well, following up on Madam Chair's comments as it relates to perhaps there's an opportunity to come back. I want to state publicly as well, as I talked with my team and with our representatives on the accountability committee, as well as with the chair, that I believe it's imperative that when we provide feedback, it's done in such a way that is qualified and it comes from us in a holistic fashion, very analogous as we get input, or we give input, whereby it's provided in a format where we have a period of time and that it's evident as opposed to an email. So I do want to share that as well. That's something that we have conveyed. So with that as a backdrop, having convened a cross-section of members of my leadership team, as well as subject matter experts in this space that report within the auspices of our Chief Operating Officer, Michael Ford, as I look at the various segments, we support the concept and theory, supporting the proposal's first 4 bullets, which you heard from Madam Chair in reference to improving collaboration between RTD and the communities, increasing opportunities for public input, advancing social equity goals by developing community-based transit and promoting innovative mobility solutions. I would offer up that clarification is needed regarding the proposal's 5th bullet, where it talks about the whole notion of equity once again. And I would say equity means fairness. Equality is the state of being equal. So recognizing that RTD is responsive to a variety of needs across the region, if you had geographic equity, we would in turn equate that to equality. And so that's why I'm seeking clarification, because there's a different understanding of what that is. And of course, RTD supports rebuilding trust and transparency. As it relates to the membership, let me be clear that we move people and we need to have an understanding of what our customers' pain points are. So when you look at the composition of the service councils as outlined, we are interested in the number of seats within each classification, because I think the customer's voice is paramount. Recognizing that stakeholders, it's important to hear what they have to say, but recognizing that you have individuals that are utilizing the system that have an understanding of what it means when they're waiting, when a bus doesn't meet a time point, and the implications of such. When you think about interlining in local routes versus regional routes, all of that comes from the voice of the customer who is actually enduring this mode of transport. As it relates to geography, recognizing that there will be a stakeholder group to look at how this will all come to be. We do support the notion of a travel shed, and that's really indicative by the enhanced community and stakeholder engagement that we have done thus far in reference to leveraging geographic sectors. And so as we look at that from a service delivery point of view and recognizing what it takes to deliver transit service and how you go into planning that, we believe that that would be in the best interest, especially for our customer segments. And then last but not least, when we talk about this RTD resource allocation, I think if anything, we are people that move people, and we do that by providing mobility freedom and enabling access to regional activity centers, thereby enhancing the quality of life. So when we talk about activity centers within our service area, and what I mean by that, we're talking about large employment sites, business centers, educational institutions, medical centers, social service agencies, convention centers, the airport, entertainment and sporting venues. And those span the region. For instance, large employer sites, you have, the Central Business District in Denver, but you also have, the Ann Schultz Center that's in Aurora. When you talk about educational institutions and things, you have Denver and Boulder. You have a convention center, the National Western Center, you have Gaylord Center. So when we think about it, we are a regional agency, and people aren't traditionally just traveling within their small areas. And so we have to look at it and stand back and think about that as it talks about the value, as opposed to, generating a report or something of the like. But more specifically, I leave this as well. It's important that we look at our economic impact, because when we talk about transit, we need to look at it through the lens of not just our regional economy, but state and federal economy, the direct and indirect impacts on the economy, because we are recipients of, use taxes. So you don't have to reside in this area for us to benefit. So we are spawning, the economy in that vein. So when we talk about what is the value allocation, we'd be remiss not to take that into consideration. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll yield the floor, and thank you for the opportunity to share these, to share viewpoints that my team and I have. Thanks.
You're on mute.
Let me ask before we move on, if Director Whitmore, is Vice Chair of the committee who attends this, if you have anything to say.
I think the discussion is going to be more valuable than any repetitive mentions that I make, Madam Chair. Both you and Deborah have done a great job of summarizing things. So let's get on with the input. I think that's going to be extremely valuable.
Great. I believe I saw Director Catlin first. Is that right?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I wanted to let you know that I appreciated the opportunity when you reached out. We had a telephone conversation about this. And I also wanted to acknowledge Directors Cook, Lewis, Williams, and Deschelle for their thoughtful comments, written comments. As I read this, even after we talked, it occurred to me that there's one sector that is not mentioned, and CEO General Manager Johnson just referred to the economic impact that we as an agency have in the region and in the state. And it occurred to me that such entities as our chambers of commerce in all of our regions and really could be tapped, because we talk about developing partnerships, and those are the very people that we need to have at the table in these discussions for partnerships and meaningful partnerships going forward. So my suggestion is that we do have that business component in those chambers of commerce. And looking at it from a slightly selfish point of view, a lot of your communities have strong governments, whether they be city councils, town councils, or county commissioners. There are some really strong advocates, but there are some areas that do not have that strong a representation. And that's why I think it would be important to include some of those chambers of commerce type agencies or economic development councils. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Good suggestion. I'm taking notes. And I apologize. I don't know who came next. I'm going to, it looks like Director Busick came next.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks for everybody's input and the people that submitted written input as well. Overall, I agree in great part with Director Cook's comments. With regard to the bullet point on geographic equity, I think that needs to be there, but I agree that we need to understand what that means. And I know that there were other comments about geographic equity versus social equity, and it's not one or the other, that's for sure. And I think that's made pretty clear by the fact the Accountability Committee has an entire separate policy statement regarding social equity. So I think that's great, and we need to always keep that at the forefront. With regard to membership, I think directors need to be involved with whatever the geographic component of the boundary is going to be, because we represent a lot of people too, right? We represent the entire district, so I think we should be somehow involved, and I think Director Cook's comments hit on that as well. With regard to the geography, county versus travel shed, I don't know how you make travel shed the way to go. Travel sheds change, travel patterns change, and I would think, depending on how you identify a travel shed, that's subject to change, whereas county boundaries are not. With regard to the comments made by Director Cook on working jointly with RTD to make this happen, I don't want to see these service councils be autonomous and work in separate from RTD. They really need to coordinate with us and with our planning department and our service planner. Otherwise, they're just operating in a vacuum. It'd be great, if they worked autonomously, they come up with some service plan that may make absolutely no sense. And so I think it's best, and I think Director Cook's comments address that as well. That's all I have. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Who else is next of those with your hand raised? I'm going to go with Director Williams. Director Williams also gave very helpful written comments and spoke with some of the people from the LCCs, which sent in very helpful comments too. And I responded to all of them and appreciate their comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair Pro Tem, Vice Chair, Director, what other titles you may have. There's a couple of things I just want to point out. As everybody here, I think, knows, I'm a huge proponent of using the existing groups that we have now. Not only do we have local coordinating councils in 7 counties in our region, we have transportation management associations also out there. Both of those are transit-related organizations, some of whom have been around for 10 years or more, representing interest in the business community and in the human services community. So I'd like to make sure that we include them. I have 2 other points I want to share with everyone. There's a bill, I believe, moving through right now that has to do from the Regional Air Quality Council that has to do with employer trip reduction planning that is going to require that employers in our district be able to prove that 40% of their employees are either working from home or using transit. That is something that we need to be looking at. That's an indicator of where the world around us is going in the future. And the last question I want to ask, I find it interesting that I've not heard any discussion yet about using the 15 districts that we represent. Since those are legislated now, and that would involve each of us in areas that we have worked very hard to establish a relationship in. So I just like to throw that in there with travel shed and other considerations that maybe we could use the districts that we already have. And those are my comments for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Broom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Has anybody talked with Dr. Cog about their thoughts about this issue, and also to get their thoughts about how the changes that they've made have been working out? When I used to serve on that board, and this went on for many, many years, in the TIP process, every project was scored, and it didn't matter where it was at geographically. Everything was lined up by point numbers, and then they drew a line when they ran out of money. But now, in recent years, as I understand it, they've formed some sub-districts, and they've allocated the money out to them and let them pick projects. And I wonder how that's working out. Thanks.
I can answer a little bit of that. The Dr. Cog's staff drew the recommendation up on this sub-regional councils for the accountability committee, since they're acting as staff to the accountability committee. They do have these sub-regional forums that are county-based and include staff and elected officials from the various cities and towns in the county and the county itself. I can't speak to all of them, but the ones I've heard in my area, they did not expect to like that approach, but they have liked the approach. But again, there would be 7 of those in our district, as they're all different counties. So there's a good questions, and I'm writing them down. Director Deschel.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you also, Director Whitmore, and those who have taken the time to chat on the phone. I know we've spent a lot of time since submitting my written comments, just going back and forth on this. And I won't reiterate what's in there, but I do want to highlight a few items that have come up. On the proposal section, I think we need to be honest, and as General Manager and CEO Johnson mentioned, geographic equity is really an ask for geographic equality, which I don't necessarily think fits within this. If we're really saying we're going to be social equity and we're going to be equity minded, then let's say that. If people want geographic equality, then let's say that. From what I understand from speaking with folks who work in the equity space, geographic equity is a term that may have been coined by a director here or somewhere else and has just been used over and over again to really just mean equal spending across the districts. Well, I think it's vital that we rebuild trust and transparency with constituents. That should be its own bullet if it is supposed to stand on its own. If it's connected to geographic equity, then let's call it geographic equality. And I firmly believe that we don't need geographic equality to rebuild trust and transparency with constituents. On membership, I'm sure this was not intentional, but university is a term that means it has both undergraduate and graduate courses of study. So for example, Community College of Denver or community college students would not be included in that group. I also think our youth deserve a seat at the table. Many of them use our services to get to and from school. And many of them rely on our services to get to and from school if they have jobs, that should be there. And to the extent we are asking citizens to be a part of our committees, I know I'm relatively confident that we provide a pass to people who serve on our committees. And when you're asking for time and labor of people, I'm a big believer that you need to pay them for it. And that saying that it's all volunteer is not equitable and really limits who can and can't participate. So really want to drive that home. And the resource allocation, I appreciate the value and taking into account the entire economic impact that RTD provides. If people find it valuable, great. If it's something we're already doing, great. But I think as many on this call know, the way that economic impact is calculated varies widely. And the devil is really in the details on this. And as a policymaking body, I don't know that we need to get into that, but it's really a matter of, is this worth the time and effort to do for data that might not be that useful and actionable, because someone else might sit there and say, well, I crunched the numbers and I came up with a number that's vastly different from yours. Okay, well, then we just spent all this time and money for someone to say, I came up with a different number. But I do appreciate really the work that has gone into this, but really wanted to drive those few points home as we sort of bring this back.
Thank you. Director Tisdale.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. To some extent, some of this may be piling on, but I do want to note that there is no articulated, express, or specific reference to the LCCs, which are the designated voices of the very sub-regions that the Accountability Committee addresses here. Now, it may be argued that the word stakeholders, as used in the proposal, is intended to include these LCCs. But this arguably, I submit, has the effect of minimizing or marginalizing the importance of the LCCs. So I join those who have emphasized the centrality of our LCCs in this process. I know that TSAC, Transportation Solutions, Arapahoe County, and Douglas County Transportation Solutions are critically important and representative and helpful participants in this process. So let's go ahead and name them as participants in this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Director Cook.
Thank you very much. A couple of quick things. As a general approach, I think what you've outlined is a good one. There are obviously a lot of things that have to be fleshed out yet. And I like the idea of broadening the stakeholders group to encompass some of those things. I think that will make for a better process. Regarding, I did reach out to Arvada, the largest local government in District L, or at least representing the largest part of District L, I should say. And I didn't talk to anybody on the city council about it, but I did talk to the economic development and community development manager, and he was quite favorably impressed with the idea of the service councils. And his point of view was, we commit to land use plans that hold for 50 or 100 years. And if we all want to develop areas that are places where people don't have to use their cars or don't have to rely on a car so much, then we also need to have a say in the transit service that's delivered that makes that possible. So in other words, they didn't want to be committing to a transit-oriented area when they had no say in whether or not transit was provided to the area. So he thought from that standpoint, it worked for multiple aims. I think General Manager Johnson said a way to define equity is fairness. And I think if we're talking in sort of a generic way, not as a term of art, that resonates for me in terms of what we're talking about with regard to geographic equity. And I think I'd heard this good example of how you can look at it. I think Director Williams has brought up the idea that she and I, who don't have kids, willingly pay our school taxes as a way to support that common good. But I think the expectation for people who are paying those taxes is that there would be schools within their area to serve the people who needed them. And I think that's the point that folks who talk about geographic equity are really honing in on. The idea that, yes, it may not be that everybody will have access, but the people who do within their areas should, as a matter of equity and fairness. And also that, you know, the population as a whole is paying into the kitty to help make those services possible. So there should be a say. So that's all. Sorry for a long-winded response. Thank you.
No, it was a very good response. Thank you. All of these are. I see Director Davidson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and thank you to you, Director Geisinger and Director Whitmore, for keeping us apprised of this. We certainly appreciate the opportunities to stay informed on this. I just wanted to make one comment and two recommendations or thoughts. First of all, I think the idea of doing some type of local service council in general from a very high level makes a lot of sense to me. I think we're missing the mark in a couple of places. You know, I have in some ways the blessing and the difficulty of having multiple very different types of cities within the district up here in District I. And there are very different needs, different frustrations, different gaps, et cetera. So the idea of getting local voices involved, including our customers, I think is very helpful. A few things occur to me. One recommendation I have, it may be that one size doesn't fit all for this. So, you know, I'm glad there will be working groups on this. I think there's a lot of details we're starting to get around the periphery on here, but it's clear that we need working groups to actually get into those details. But take, for example, the travel shed versus the county. I think there are some counties that could take on a little bit more and maybe would have a different approach, whereas travel shed may make sense for some of our smaller cities and smaller counties and also areas. So I would encourage that we work with our transportation managers as we start to figure that out. I have gotten feedback from some of our transportation managers at a couple of different cities, and there are varying viewpoints here. And there are some concerns too, that this could kind of turn into the haves and have-nots. So I just want to emphasize that this may be not a one-size-fits-all. I'd love to stay apprised as the working group works on this, but I would hope we would look at all options. The other thing that I just wanted to recommend as we do put together some the working group on this and look at this, we need to have an eye towards getting the customer voice on this. And I think there are a number of ways to do that, you know, directly involving customers, as we've talked about in the service councils, as well as things perhaps this board can be involved in with enhanced town halls, working in conjunction with our cities to go out and meet our customers. I think we need their voice in here. We are a big area, and when I think of products, RTD has the product. It's very easy for us to verify that the product is working. You know, how's the ridership? You know, how are the routes working? But it's very hard for us to validate, are we giving the customers exactly what they need? And that also, I can see that we have some gaps across the district. So I think we just also need to have an eye on how we get the customer voice in this. So just to summarize, thank you. I'm in support of getting local voices, but let's make sure we keep an eye on the customer. And certainly I would recommend the mentality that one size may not fit all here for different types of cities, counties, travel sheds, et cetera. So, thank you.
Thank you. Director Whitmore, I see your hand now.
You know, Director Lewis was ahead of me. I just had a couple of summary thoughts, so let's let
Oh, I'm
Director
sorry.
Lewis go ahead.
Director Lewis, I didn't see your hand there. Your turn.
It's all good. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director Whitmore. I get the question that I have, Lynn, for you is what are we solving for with this recommendation? And so I'm just curious as what the discussion has been with the Accountability Committee about what the concern is that they'd like to be able to find a resolution to or to fix.
Yeah, you know, I think in terms of what I'm hearing in the Accountability Committee, and I would ask Director Whitmore or Ms. Johnson to jump in as well, but a big piece of it is just the forum where RTD is listening and is getting information, and where the service decisions are not made and then going out to get feedback, but we're getting feedback as we've started recently, getting feedback earlier on and in the process and working together. So that sort of thing. Also a forum that, I forget the term, Deborah probably knows it, but where they can go out and create local transit plans where they're looking at equities and you know, the people who need service the most and all of those things. And then there's another one that it speaks probably to more county-based groups, but could work another way, but is the idea that people in Colorado don't tend to vote for district-wide taxes, statewide taxes, but they do tend to support transportation and other things at the very local level. And that this may be a way to enhance transit by going to the people for additional funding. And I would ask Deborah Johnson or Troy Whitmore to jump in there.
I would love to do so, Director Lewis. It's I think it can be summed up in one word: proactivity. Well, two words: lack of proactivity. More of a front-loaded approach, where service planning is more of a discussion and then implementation instead of just presented. And that does make for a challenge for our staff, but I think they would appreciate the input. So it's more of a front loading of input and a earlier exchange. And we heard that whether it was Lone Tree or Boulder or Central Denver a number of times. And so I think that's the issue that they're trying to address. I just had a couple other comments. I'll wait for those though, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Hopefully that helps a bit, Chantel.
It helps some. So I do appreciate you both chiming in. I will make some of the same comments, quite honestly, specifically with the social equity and then the conversation around geographic equity. Those are actually conflict. And just by nature, that's just, they conflict, Director Geisinger. And so if the Accountability Committee is serious about social equity, then I think that they would have to address geographic equity from their proposal. Otherwise, or remove social equity and advance geographic equity, and that is of the prerogative of the committee. But that is very concerning for me. Are there other models that and I say other models, like other transit agencies that have adopted a similar model that the Accountability Committee is looking at?
They did look at LA Metro and a couple of other models. I think there's one in Seattle. Can you help with that, Ms. Johnson?
Yes, from my understanding, I do know they look at LA Metro. And as I said with my other comments, when you see one transit agency, you've seen one transit agency, because recognizing that it's all LA County and it's a large county. And so basically it was geographic in the sense of oh my gosh, some that are closer into the inner city versus what we call the valley, being San Fernando Valley and the South Bay. So it's really comparing apples to fish in reference to the service network. So that's why I say it's important that we get something that's indigenous to our market. And it's very difficult picking up something else because that service council model morphed into something else when the organization was structured in a different way and is a holdover.
That's helpful. I'm glad you said that because I wasn't sure I was following when you've seen one transit agency, you've seen one transit agency, and now that makes sense to me. So I appreciate you expounding on that. So around the membership, I mean, I sent a lot. I guess the question, Lynn, because I won't bore you all with all the stuff that I sent to you all. The question is, I probably would just ask about process. How does this get back? How does this information get back to the council? And how does this go back? How does this go back to the accountability committee, our concerns? And is the accountability committee willing to, if we were to say, hey, this actually doesn't work for RTD, are they willing to explore something else or to not even move forward in this recommendation?
I can't answer the second question. I think that they do have a lot of interest in the local service councils. I would say, though, that as time has gone along and our general manager has been participating, that I feel like the trust level has gone up. But I do think that they seem to be heading in this direction. So if we said don't do it, I think we'd want to explain it, but that is an option that we could take. The process is I think it's a very good question, and you raised it before. I guess before we get to that question as a board, and I hope we do as part of some of our planning in the near future and looking at the small committees, which I think would help a lot. What I talked with the chair about today is that potentially we could take these comments and try to modify what I drafted earlier. And if people want to suggest amendments tonight, or something along those lines, we can bring it back to the board as something we could take to the accountability committee at the committee meeting on April 6th. It wouldn't be all the way to a board meeting, but I think if we had, some initial decision from the board, it's really just feedback. It's not our plan. So I guess that would be my recommendation. If you have amendments to suggest to what we sent out today, and I'm hearing, I agree with much of this in terms of, the LCCs participating, the TMAs, the chambers. I think those are all good groups to be suggesting. The universities is too limited, and a number of those things. A lot of that, again, it seemed like there are a lot of details to be worked out, and what they're kind of looking at is a high-level policy plan with some specifics in it. And so the suggestion we had talked about was that we would ask that this stakeholder work group that RTD would be forming would not just look at the geographic areas of the local service councils, but would also look at some of the other things like membership and how they work with RTD and some of those issues.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Go ahead.
You go. Okay.
I mean, that actually makes me, well, one, it sounds like the accountability committee is probably just going to move forward, whether it's something that we support or maybe it's something that we might have concerns about as a board, which is also why I keep asking about the process, because I want to make sure that as we go outside of the agency, that how the board feels as a collective is fairly represented to the folks who are making these decisions. And so that's my concern. And I'm really, really concerned about the social equity and the geographic equity. I mean, at minimum, if we aren't having true conversations about equity, and what that means, I think we could get in a whole world of trouble. I do wonder, and maybe General Manager, you might, or maybe you, Mr. Ford, might be able to share your insights as how this, especially around the resource allocation, might interface with Title VI.
Thank you, Director Lewis. That is a very good question as we look at Title VI, just for everybody's edification in relationship to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And more specifically, the executive order that was instituted for environmental justice. They go hand in hand and requires us to do a fair and service equity analysis. And I think as we look at it holistically, it does come into play because we have to look at our service area, in totality as 2,342 miles. It requires us in reference to looking at census data with an overlay over our service area. So when we look at these various aspects, they can't be done in a compartmentalized fashion. Yeah. And so I do think that would impact us, because recognizing when we utilize federal dollars and if we get new vehicles and we're deploying them, we have to ensure that they are distributed in such a way as to not cause a disproportionate burden or disparate impact on minorities and low-income individuals. So there is the potential that could come into play. So thank you very much for that question. It's a good one.
Thank you. No, absolutely. And Mr. Ford, please feel free to chime in if you would like to. I appreciate the spirit of this, Director Geisinger. And so hopefully that can be conveyed to the accountability committee. I just think I have a lot of concerns about low-income communities, about communities of color, as how this might impact those communities specifically. And I think the accountability committee should be thinking about this. And I think maybe because they're new to this transit space, that they aren't thinking about the nuances and the complications. This also, in terms of process, feels like this comes before that the service councils might be making recommendations to the board. And just because those recommendations are made to the board does not mean that the board might adopt those. And so as a board member, I'd be concerned about, when we're talking about establishing trust and rebuilding our relationships, that this actually in the long term might be harmful for what we are making in terms of the strides we are making currently. If the sub-regional councils are often coming to us with recommendations that we just cannot do because they're inequitable or for what other reasons, maybe it's funding, for reasons that we can't do. And so that's concerning for me as well. I've said this a number of times, and we can take it or leave it, because I trust the general manager to be able to operate this agency. But our responsibility as board members are to put forth policy, and this feels as though that the accountability committee is in some way doing the jobs that we are elected to do. And so it's just generally concerning for me as an elected member of this board, that the accountability committee would be doing, would be proposing something of this matter. And it begs the question for me, and I know you all hate when I ask this, but it does beg the question, if the accountability committee is going to operate in this way, what's the purpose of having an elected RTD board? If the accountability committee is going to do the work that we are elected to do. And then finally, I think just as a gentle reminder that the accountability committee is not representative of our like, we're a regional transportation district. There's no representation from our Denver folks, right? And so I think it's important for us to recognize that the recommendations that are coming from the accountability committee are not a regional perspective, and pretty heavily influenced by membership of the North, just by membership of the accountability committee. And so I think that's just important for us to remember. I will conclude with that, but I would strongly recommend that the accountability committee remove the geographic equity from the from this proposal because it actually is not in line with our own values as an agency. And in terms of membership, I think that it creates hardships this will create hardships for the folks that we serve. It's not a focus on the customers, and that's really what we need to be focused on. Also remembering that the people that are utilizing our services right now depend on our services. They don't have other options. They aren't working from home, right? They are traveling to get their basic needs met. And so that's just something for us to remember. And I would just generally be opposed to the resource allocation. I believe that it would cause harm to our communities, and I am not interested in harming communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, I'm going to go to General Counsel Snyder before we move on.
Thank you, Vice Chair Geisinger. So just a reminder on process. As you might recall, the board adopted the proposal that was originally put together that laid out the accountability committee's sort of charge and some of the scope of what they were going to be looking at and the process for the committee to be putting forth recommendations. And my sense is that both staff and the board really appreciates the opportunity to provide feedback in this informal way. As the accountability committee comes up with these, conceptual recommendations, you're engaging in this interactive process where you're going to talk through and give some informal response to those informal recommendations. But I just wanted to remind you that the proposal does envision that the accountability committee is going to put together a comprehensive report that's going to put together all of their recommendations. And so the service councils, of course, is just one sort of isolated area that they're looking at. So I just want to remind you that you all will be given the opportunity to review all of the recommendations sort of holistically so that you can see how each of the different recommendations might impact the others. And then the proposal provides that the board will have 45 days to formally respond to those. So I just wanted to remind that the accountability committee is an independent advisory body who's going to put these recommendations together for the governor, transportation, leadership, as well as RTD to respond to and reflect on.
Thank you, Melanie. I really appreciate you bringing that up. I guess the concern that the reason I keep bringing it up now is because I'd hate for us to get to the end of the process and what the accountability committee provides to us is something that we can't live with, and we actually have to respond to them that actually none of the things that you all have provided to us in terms of recommendations or things that we are willing to adopt as a board. And so I hope, Director Geisinger, that you are getting that I would really like for this to be a collaborative process and not wait till the end to say yes or no, essentially, but really to co-create what it is that the accountability committee believes that we should be doing as an agency.
And that's a very good point, and that's exactly why we're bringing this to the board. Is it doesn't make sense for us to feel like there are some ways to make this work, but we're going to be silent and let them do something that we don't like and then reject it. That doesn't put any of us at a good position. We're much better off working together. And I do feel like they are listening. So I'll just say that for now, and I'll ask for the remaining directors. Let's see. Is Director Sloan, are you next?
I'm not sure if I'm next, but I'll take it.
Okay.
And I would like to follow up on what everyone has said. I love the idea of getting more direct and timely local input to RTD. I think that's where the accountability committee is coming from, and I don't think anybody here disagrees with it. It's also the trend for the metro area that there's more and more collaboration between areas of town. I think it's a great idea if the accountability committee could add in the LLCs, the chambers. I also think it's important to have elected officials in there because most jurisdictions have their own transportation plans, which include a transit plan, but primarily it is something that's really important, as everybody has said, to pull in the voice of the customers. So, we keep talking about the working group having to work on the details. These aren't details. This is really going to be grappling with how are the people going to work together? How are they going to be chosen? How can you recruit to get the voices of the people? So even though it's a trend to work together, I think this is an extraordinary effort that could either be a shining example for other transit systems, or it could bomb, frankly, if we don't come up with a good plan. I would point out that geographic equity, in my opinion, is not contrary to social equity, because I look at it that employees are going to be invited into the groups for different travel sheds or counties. A lot of times, to be frank, in the metro area, housing is so expensive that there's an exchange of people. The transit could be serving people in those areas are going perhaps into Denver or the tech center, and people from other areas are going to work in these high-priced housing areas. So it seems to me it could work out for the benefit of all the customers, adding ridership in both directions. I know most people just in Golden do not work in Golden except in COVID times. And most people who work in Golden don't live in Golden. And until we get equity in housing, we need to move these folks where they need to go. So in sum, I admire the concept, and I think it's going to take an extraordinary amount of work to make it work, but I think it can happen. So, and thank you for all the folks working so hard on this concept. There are going to be more, but it can work out for the benefit of our transit district. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Director Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so listening very intently to what everyone has to say, I'm really getting more and more excited to hear about this possible proposal from the Accountability Committee, and sort of building on particularly Directors Whitmore and Sloan, and but also keeping in mind Director Lewis's feedback of what is this trying to fix, and then taking into consideration Director Whitmore saying, well, this is an attempt to get people in on the ground level, to get feedback in the process early so that we don't have disagreements or difficulties down the line. And I think I'm all for that. And I think that's something that we need to continue to do, is getting people engaged. And I'm sure some of these local councils in some areas will be more successful, in some areas they will not be. In some areas they're going to have perhaps more input is going to be adopted through the planning process, and some areas it may not be. And I think that's something that, as the process goes forward, as we start to hear from these local service councils, that we will know that, and we will be able to say, hey, why is it in this area that we are adopting both staff recommendations and ultimately by us as RTD directors? Why are we accepting more from one area versus another? And I think that's something that we can keep close tabs on. I do have sort of I don't even know if I'd call it a concern, but a thought. So if we do have local officials and members of the community interacting with staff, interacting with RTD service planning staff, my only hope is that these staff do not feel put upon, that they don't feel necessarily political pressure, they don't feel personal pressure. That's sort of our job. It's the general manager's job. It's our communication staff's job to sort of, go through like listening to the public. I just don't want them to feel uncomfortable. So I guess that's sort of one of my concerns with that element of having our staff work directly with other officials or with the community in that respect. Another concern I would have, or sort of just a thought, would be what if, as I said earlier, some communities, some local service councils get more done than others, and then some communities would say, hey, why do we do this at all? Because you're listening to us, you're engaging with us, but we're not getting our suggestions adopted, whether it's by the staff, our staff, or by the RTD board. So ultimately, so I guess those are two areas that I would sort of bring up for us to also reflect upon. Thank you.
I see Director Cook, and thank you, Director Rosenthal. I see Director Cook and Director Davidson, but I want to circle back to Director Whitmore first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My comments were to some input from Director Deschelle and Tisdale, which I believe you adequately covered. I think those were good comments on colleges versus university, the LCCs, and a few things of that nature. I'm just resting my writing hand because I'm taking copious notes. Keep it up. This is very helpful. So that's all I have.
Great. Director Cook.
Yeah, thank you. Just to wrap up and to, I must have had too much time over the weekend. I plotted the members of the accountability committee on overlaid on our district map. And, what I find is that if there's a preponderance of members someplace, it's really to the east and or to the southeast. But I don't think that's the bone to pick. I think what we've seen generally is that people, for example, if they are mainly in, what I did was I plotted them where their organization is, if they're representing their organization, like the University of Colorado or CDOT. So there is sort of a cluster in Denver, Mile High Connects, et cetera. But my view is that most of those folks are representing the region-wide interests. So I didn't, at least from what I could tell, I didn't see that there was a preponderance or a weighting at all. In fact, quite the opposite to the north. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Cook. And Director Davidson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to keep it brief. I have a question and then a comment. To what extent, what's the output with the service councils? Are we expecting a recommendation that this is something the board should consider establishing a policy? Are we expecting something where maybe it would be recommended we change bylaws? Are we expecting legislative action? What do we expect the output on the service council piece to be from the accountability committee? Do we have that information right now?
As to whether it would be a legislative action or a recommendation?
Right.
What I'm hearing is that this would be a recommendation to RTD, and they've suggested this work group that at least is working on geographic split, whether it's travel sheds or counties. As General Counsel Snyder said, ultimately they're going to come out with a full report, and the board, RTD board, has 45 days after that report comes out to accept or reject the recommendations. And so at that point, I suppose if there was something we were really toe to toe on, they could go to the legislature or something like that. I think our hope is, to continue working collaboratively so we don't get there.
So is it possible that we could get a recommendation about, service councils, and then, this board may see things a little differently, so we implement it and our staff and our board implements it a little bit differently than is written in the recommendation, and we just kind of by consensus agree that the spirit has been honored? Is that a fair assessment of where we might finish with this?
Troy, you want to answer that? Will you? I think that is very possible, and I think that was what we had in mind when I was working with Ms. Johnson and Chair Vera-Mafietti and trying to follow the comments we had to say there are a lot of things to be worked out here. As Marjorie Sloan said, there are a lot of details, and I can't speak for the Accountability Committee, but my sense is they're not trying to work through all of those details that, if they see RTD supporting the policy and the suggestions that they're making, that's what they're looking for. But again, I can't fully speak to it.
Yeah, I would say that
thank you very much.
That those details are not fleshed out yet, Director Davidson, and that's part of the working group. And I would hope, to Director Lewis's point, many points, that's our job to take it from the recommendation if we accept it or not, and to construct that. The Accountability Committee has not been appointed by us, remember, it's appointed by the governor and a couple of pretty powerful legislators. And we supplemented with as much input as they would take from us, trying to remain third party in nature. Their job will be done in July, and this will not continue. So, it will be ours to deal with, and how we structure the working groups and, the procedures thereafter. And I didn't see Ms. Schneider's shaking her head yes or no on my comments, but please interject if I'm off track there mentally.
Yeah, thank you for the comments. My question is coming because I want to make sure we don't over-prescribe a solution, because I would say, and Director Lewis, thank you very much for your comments about what problem are we trying to solve. I mean, I'm a big believer that a problem half defined, or a problem well defined, is a problem half solved. So, we do need to have a good understanding. And I think many of the problems that we are trying to solve, in fairness, predate CEO and General Manager Deborah Johnson being here. And I'd just like to highlight that there are some of those problems. I mean, for example, we have transportation managers who conversations completely go dead. They don't get, responses from RTD on things. IGAs will sit for years. In Broomfield, for example, we've had flex ride service cut and created travel sheds that are 15 minutes apart that we have riders, and no one's really talking to or engaging with those riders. There's just some things that are broken and kind of getting lost. And I think that there's a lot of work that we need to do to just prepare how we're listening to customers, how we're listening to our transportation managers that are working on these local mobility plans. So there are some problems to be solved. I've actually spent some time with the cities that I have access to and can speak with very easily, documenting specifically some of those problems. And I will share some of that information out with you all. And I know I've had a chance to work with some of you on some of this. But I just don't think we should over-prescribe something here. I think, we all agree that there's, the spirit of this is to work better with our customers, to work better with our local partners. And I want to be very hyper aware of the fact that these problems predate CEO and General Manager Johnson. And Ms. Johnson, please don't take this the wrong way, but this is still pretty new that you just arrived here. And I think that on the Accountability Committee, we've already seen a change in tone there. Ms. Johnson has been on all of those calls, at least all the ones that I've had the opportunity to listen to. I think the accountability committee is listening very carefully. And I hear a lot of hope with a lot of our cities that maybe now is the time that they're going to be heard, that IGAs won't take 3 years, or, that there's going to be an opportunity to share a vision and talk about how our communities are changing as people move out of Denver or as people move into the Front Range. So I just want to be aware of that. And my recommendation would be we don't overprescribe anything, same as I was saying for, the travel shed versus the county, because I just don't think we don't know what we don't know. And we probably need to prototype some listening sessions, some councils, and kind of test some things out to do some repair work. So anyway, thank you for giving me the time here to speak.
And I think that's very well said. Let me ask you a question. Are you thinking that creating these councils is over prescribing a solution?
I don't know. I'd almost say if we created the council, maybe we need some flexibility for a little bit of time to see how it works and to get some of that feedback to see if we're solving the problems. So I think defining our problems, and I would love, I'm happy to help with some of the ones I've written down, defining those problems and then testing, have we solved them, particularly through the lens of are we better addressing our customers' needs, I think would be a good thing to do. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that the council itself might be overprescribing. I would just suggest kind of a high level spirit of what we're trying to accomplish. We allow CEO and General Manager Johnson to take a couple of different approaches, maybe even in parallel to how we solve those problems, and then we measure early and often how we're doing at solving them. So not necessarily saying one way or the other whether the councils themselves are overprescribed, but just some flexibility might be helpful. And that's why I was curious, is this going to the legislature, or is this a recommendation that we as a board can determine how to settle the territory?
It's a good question, and one we might take back to the accountability committee, because they are, unless they choose to continue their work, I think that they are intended to end by July, and that seems to be what they're aiming for, is to get their final report. And we, I think, recently have enhanced our listening process. So, putting that out there, that there are other ways to do this. And, I'm not sure exactly where to take that at this point, but I think those are good comments, and maybe worth thinking through how we address those.
Great. Well, thank you. Yeah, I think the spirit of what I'm saying is flexibility. I think would be helpful, but yeah, thank you.
All righty. I see still Director Lewis and Director Cook have your hands up. Is that intentional? No. Yes. Okay. Director Lewis.
Just 3 quick points. I really appreciate Director Davison's comments, especially around defining I think within the proposal, there should be a problem statement so that we know that what it is that we are solving for. That might help. That would help me. To his point around providing the opportunity to do some proofing, I think that's a really good idea. Instead of just saying here's the solution here is the solution, maybe we do a pilot of some sort, right? To give us the opportunity to proof this out, to see if this is even the right approach. Maybe it's not, or maybe it is, but I would hate for us to get in a situation where we see that it's not working, but because it's been prescribed from the legislature that we keep, or from the accountability committee, that we stay, that we continue to do that. I back to defining the problem. I mean, one thing that sticks out to me is that there isn't much opportunity for us to watch General Manager lead, because we are solving for things that predated her leadership, that they are prescribing things currently with a new leader who might have a vision, or who might have improved on some of these things, but because she wasn't here when this bill was being talked about. I think it's important to name that we aren't really giving our general manager the opportunity to lead as it pertains to this, and she is, and I'm speaking for her, so forgive me, general manager, but I just feel like I should say this. And she is being prescribed solutions to things that I believe she has, one, the intelligence, the brilliance, but also the expertise and the experience to be able to fix. but the accountability doesn't have the room for that. And so I really appreciate Director Davison's comment about flexibility, because I think that's needed. And then finally, a question that I have for you, Director Geisinger, is the cost for the sub-regional service councils. Like, how much will it cost to staff these councils?
Well, I don't know that I don't know what the cost of the sub-regional forums. I mean, I think it's just something that people do as part of their, what they're doing, right? And the LCCs and the TMAs and the customers may be a different question, but I don't know that what the cost would be. I mean, I think these are really good thoughts. All of the thoughts we're getting tonight, and I'm going to ask General Manager Johnson to speak to him here in just a minute if she'd like. But I see this in a way as sort of an extension of what Ms. Johnson has started with these early proactive meetings. And I love the term that these are intended to be evergreen, which was the term she used. And one way to look at this is a more organized forum for getting that information, and for them to go out and help us get, the information, working with our communications department, the local government. And I think that's why, we've kind of, Director Cook gave some feedback that we picked up in this sort of response, that is that these groups are working with the directors, which I think they assumed in the accountability committee, and with the service staff. It's like a more formal group to be getting feedback. We had those stakeholder meetings recently, and I think Director Bichelle or somebody mentioned that the turnout wasn't great. If you create a group, you're going to get the turnout. And I think the points that have been made about the LCCs and the TMAs and needing the elected officials, we have to, we want to have the people who plan transit in those areas and transportation, but we also want the riders and the the students or whatever, in my opinion. It is sort of a formalized way of getting that early feedback. Is it the only way? No, I like the idea of flexibility, but I think that's their goal, was the same goal that General Manager Johnson is looking for, and that we've all been looking for, which is to help our constituents have a bigger voice earlier on. Ms. Johnson, do you have some comments?
I would just say in relationship to the discussion that ensued, there's been some very valid points that have been discussed here. If anything, recognizing the staff time, I think that would be difficult to quantify, not recognizing what these councils will look like. Because as I said, I do have experience, but it was somewhere else. And it did require a lot of staff time in that regard. But that was, composed a little differently in a sense, and recognizing that, as described here, the intent is somewhat different, to have input on service planning, whereas before it was input on overall transit operations and a myriad of different things. The one thing that I would say is this dialogue has been good, and trying to figure out, and I'll leave that to the chair, but since you asked for my opinion, trying to figure out how this is synthesized in such a way where it can contain all of the great dialogue that is germinated, and recognizing that it needs to be consolidated in such a way where you all, as a 15-member body and 14 currently at the time in which this discussion has ensued, can come together and say, okay, we collectively as this body support A, B, and C, or is it X, Y, and Z? And then also, to the point that was raised, recognizing that there is a certain level of acumen as it relates to transportation systems management, but there is a difference between planning and transit service planning, and recognizing that there's going to be amalgamation of all these different things. The subject matter expertise still rests with the staff that we have here that does transit service planning. Within our backyard, there are not a lot of transit agencies in this region. And so when we talk about that, while I am not dismissing the transportation planners that are within our region, there is something very differently between, doing a run cut. There is something very different when you're looking at blocks and run for a schedule and somebody needs to take a paddle. And I'm using this terminology intentionally because not everybody understands that nomenclature. So when we talk about we can come together and this person kind of opine on this, that, and the other, recognizing that you may have a certain vehicle assigned to a block, you can't just move that to and fro at the drop of a dime. So those are the kind of things that I'm taking into consideration. As I heard some comments about, policy aspect in reference to having elected leaders, having constituents. But then again, we do not want to cut off our nose to spite our face when it comes to the core business of moving people and having the ability to do it in such a way where we are providing service to the vast amounts of people to this region in within a transportation network of which is beneficial to this entire region. More specifically, it can be to the state and to the country as a whole. So I think those are just really synthesized comments from what I've gleaned, and I've appreciated the discussion here. And I look forward to what we do with all of this and how this is summarized in such a way where it can be relayed to those on the accountability committee, recognizing that there are transit professionals that have an understanding, but recognizing that we can't do it alone and we need to have input, and knowing that it has to be cooperative and collaborative to get to that point. Thanks.
You're on mute. Director Geisinger, you're on mute.
Thank you. I thought that is a big challenge, is how to synthesize this. And I think great comments. Director Lewis, I'm not sure if you're finished.
Just two comments and a question. The RTD, are the Accountability Committee, the Equity Assessment Mission Statement, that was included in our packet, but I wasn't really sure how what that was. If you could just take a minute to explain the connection to the sub-regional service councils, or is there not a connection?
No, I apologize. That was that was attached and went ahead and included it. That was the other point I was about to make, which is that there will be an equity assessment from the Accountability Committee on this proposal and all their proposals, and they decided at the last meeting that it would be Mile High Connects working with their consultant that will do the equity assessment. I'm not sure the timing on that.
Okay.
But that's why I added the sentence that said that we're looking forward to seeing the equity assessment, because you raised some very good issues around Title VI and how that plays into some of this.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And then the final comment that I have for you, Director Geisinger, is as we are thinking about, as the Accountability Committee is thinking about these recommendations, it would be helpful if they might think about what the financial impact might be to the organization. So, I would like to see within the final recommendations, the cost of the implementation of that, or I guess they would be proposed costs of the implementation of said recommendations. Because I think that's important for us as directors to deliberate with in understanding how much these things are actually going to cost us to implement. And that's it. I'm done. I promise. I won't raise my hand again.
Okay, that's good. That's a very good question too. And I kind of went back to the idea of what the details are and how it's set up. Because if this is a group that's meeting quarterly and is meeting with our service staff, quarterly, that's not a heavy lift in my opinion. I think the service staff is starting to look at, and Ms. Johnson is starting to look at, continuing stakeholder meetings anyhow. So this would would kind of take, but if it's something that's, you know, much more often, it could be a heavy lift. So I think those are good questions. And again, why I think leaving as many of the planning pieces to RTD and the stakeholder work group makes the most sense. But so I agree with Ms. Johnson synthesizing all of this into something, but I guess my best shot at that would be to suggest that we try to do that and bring something back to the board April 6th, probably. Ms. Johnson, do you have any different recommendation on that?
One thing that I would qualify, recognizing that this is an effort, I would say that on March 9th, what I'm trying to say is I was planning to have a discussion on April 6th as it related to the road to recovery. And my intent is really to bifurcate the discussion with the accountability committee, because as I was sharing with some members of the board, I believe, and I said this at the last meeting, recognizing that we would be looking at our road to recovery if the accountability didn't exist. And I don't want those waters to be muddied. So with that as a backdrop, recognizing that this is important, I could move my discussion to an alternate meeting. So April 6th, if that works for you, then that's fine, because I do think there's going to be additional discussions that are needed, and that's 2 weeks from today.
Well, I guess let's talk about it and see if we can tie something together and get it out to the board and find some general agreement on it. It'd be nice to go ahead and move forward on the road to recovery discussion as well. So if everybody's okay with that, I would say TBD, that I'll work with the chair and the general manager and see what we can put together. Seem okay? Okay. Great. Any other matters? No? All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Director Williams.
Cusack, second.
Cusack, second. All right. All in favor?
Yeah.
Aye.
Great. Thank you very much. Great discussion. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.